"You do not want a companion for your aunt, your grace," said the 31st woman, before he had asked her a single question. "You want a wife, and you are too proud to say so, and you have been interviewing 30 ladies under a false pretext, like a coward. I find that I cannot respect a man who hides behind his elderly relations." The Duke of Corwood, who had been about to ring for tea, set down the bell and looked at her properly for the first time. Cedric had spent 3 exhausting days at this same desk in this same draughty study, a ledger of names open before him, conducting what his aunt insisted on calling interviews and what he privately called penance. 30 young women had sat in the chair now occupied by this impertinent creature. 30 had arranged their skirts prettily, lowered their lashes, agreed with everything he said, and praised in turn his house, his horses, his gardens, his profile, and the splendid weather that had so kindly attended their visits. 30 had angled, with greater or lesser subtlety, toward the one thing every unmarried woman in the county wanted from the Duke of Corwood, which was the Duke of Corwood's name and the Duke of Corwood's fortune, in whichever order she could get them. He had grown so weary of being flattered that he had nearly given the whole business up. And now here sat the 31st, a governess by her own account, in a plain gown of grey wool with not a ribbon to soften it, her hands bare and her chin level, and her grey eyes fixed on him with an expression of profound and unflattering candor, and she had just called him a coward to his face in his own study. "That is a remarkable opening," he said, "from a woman who has come to ask me for employment. I came to be honest with you, since no one else appears to have managed it." She did not look away. "Your advertisement said companion. But your aunt is in stout health and brisk temper, and would no more want a companion than she would want a third leg. I met her in the hall, and she told me precisely so, with great relish. Which means the post is a fiction, and the fiction is a sieve through which you are straining the daughters of the county, hoping one of them will turn out to be more than the polish on her own shoes." She tilted her head. "How many have you seen?" Cedric found, to his considerable irritation, that he answered her. 30. "And were they polished?" "Exquisitely." "And did you like a single one of them?" He opened his mouth, he closed it. He had not, in 3 days and 30 interviews, liked a single one of them, and he had not admitted that even to himself until this grey-eyed governess dragged it out of him in the space of 1 minute. "You see," she said, not unkindly, "that is your difficulty, your grace. You have been served 30 cups of sugar water and you are dying of thirst, and you cannot understand why." The Duke of Corwood had been a cynic for a long time. He had inherited young, been flattered young, and learned young that a great title turns most of the people around it into mirrors that show a man only what he wishes to see. He had stopped believing, somewhere along the way, that anyone would ever tell him the truth again, simply because no one ever did. It was the loneliest thing about being a duke, and he had never spoken of it to a living soul. "Tell me," he said slowly, leaning back in his chair, "Miss Bryony Tarr. Tell me, Miss Tarr, since you are so determined to be honest, what is your candid opinion of this house? It is too large for one man and far too cold." She glanced at the dead grate. "You economize on coal in your own study, while keeping 40 fires lit for guests who flatter you. That is the behavior of a man who values strangers' good opinion above his own comfort, which is a sad way to live. And my gardens? Every one of the 30 admired my gardens." "I did not see your gardens. I came to be interviewed, not to admire your shrubbery." She paused. "Though if you wish my honest opinion of the avenue of limes I passed coming up the drive, they are badly overgrown and want pruning, and your gardener is either lazy or afraid to tell you so. Most people, I find, are afraid to tell you things." Cedric began, very faintly, to smile. He could not at first remember the last time his face had done such a thing. "You are the rudest woman I have ever met," he said. "I am the most honest," she corrected. You have simply confused the two, because you so rarely encounter the second that you no longer recognize it without the first attached. She folded her bare hands in her plain grey lap. Now, are you going to give me the post that does not exist, or shall I save us both the indignity and go? He should have sent her away. She was impertinent past all bearing. She had insulted his house, his gardens, his motives, and his character, in roughly that order, within 10 minutes of entering the room. Any sensible duke would have shown her the door. Instead, he heard himself say, "Stay to dinner." Bryony's level composure flickered for the first time into surprise. "I beg your pardon?" "You have been so generous with your honesty," Cedric said, rising, and there was something in his weary face that had not been there an hour before, a kind of waking. "It seems only fair that I be honest in return. You are quite right. There is no post. My aunt does not want a companion. I devised the whole wretched scheme because I could not bring myself to attend the marriage market directly and be fawned over by women who would say the moon was square if they thought it would please me." He came around the desk. "I have interviewed 30 ladies hoping for one who would tell me the truth, Miss Tarr, and I had nearly concluded that no such woman existed. And then you walked into my study and called me a coward." He inclined his head. "Stay to dinner. I find I am no longer thirsty, and I should like to know why." She stayed to dinner. She told him, over a soup she pronounced undersalted to his cook's face, that she had been a governess for 6 years and meant to be one for 60 more rather than marry a man she did not respect, and that she had come to his false interview chiefly out of curiosity to see whether the famously brooding Duke of Corwood was as proud as the county said. She told him he was prouder. She told him his wine was good and his conversation, once he stopped trying to be charming, was better. She told him he laughed too rarely, and that when he did it transformed him, and that he ought to do it more, and the Duke of Corwood, who had not been told a useful true thing by anyone in a decade, drank in every blunt word of it like a man at last given water. She came back the next day to return a book he had pressed upon her, and stayed 3 hours arguing about it. She came the day after to argue about something else. Within a fortnight, the avenue of limes had been pruned, on her instruction, and the fires in the study had been lit, on her instruction, and the cook had begun salting the soup properly, also on her instruction, and the great cold house had begun, faintly, to warm, and the Duke of Corwood had begun to listen for the sound of a plain grey gown in his hall the way a frozen man listens for the first crack of a thaw. "You have changed my entire household," he told her one evening, by a study fire that now burned bright, "and you have not flattered me once." "I should hope not." Bryony looked up from the ledger of 30 names she had been reading with open scorn. "Look at this. 30 women, and beside each one you have written some small dishonest thing she told you, as though collecting evidence that the whole world lies. It is the saddest document I have ever seen. A man does not keep a record like this unless he very badly wants to be proven wrong." "And have you proven me wrong, Miss Tarr?" She set down the ledger. For once she did not answer at once, and the rare hesitation in her sharp face was worth more to him than all the flattery of all the 30 before her. "I have proven," she said carefully, "that there is at least one person in England who will tell you the truth even when it does not serve her, which it has not, I would point out. I have insulted your house, your gardens, your wine, and your character, and a sensible woman wishing to catch a duke would have done precisely the opposite." "Yes," Cedric said, "she would have." He rose and crossed to her, and the cynicism that had armored him for a decade had quietly fallen away somewhere between the soup and the lime trees. "Which is how I know, Miss Tarr, that when I ask you the next question, your answer, whatever it is, will be the truest thing anyone has ever said to me." He stood before her chair. "I did not advertise for a wife. I advertised for honesty because I had despaired of ever finding it, and because I think somewhere underneath my pride I knew the two were the same thing. I have found it. I find I'd not want to let it go. He drew a breath. Marry me, not the polished one of 30. The 31st, who told me the plain truth and has never once stopped. Will you have me? Bryony Tarr looked up at the Duke of Corwood, and the famous sharp candor of her face trembled into something far softer, something she had perhaps been guarding more carefully than he knew. I have a great many faults, your grace, she said. I am blunt to the point of rudeness, and I cannot abide flattery, and I shall go on telling you when your soup is undersalted and your motives are cowardly for the rest of your natural life. I am aware, he said. It is the only proposal I have ever made, and I made it on purpose. A slow, helpless, honest smile broke across her face, the first he had ever seen her give without an opinion attached. Then yes, Bryony said. Yes, Cedric, I will marry you and I will love you, and I will never once tell you a comfortable lie. She rose and took his hands in her bare ones, which is, I think, a far rarer thing to be offered than any of the other 30 could have given you. It is the rarest thing in the world, the Duke of Corwood agreed, and for the second time in a fortnight, and far from the last in his life, he laughed. They were married before the limes came into leaf. And in all the long warm years that followed, the Duke of Corwood was the most fortunate man of his acquaintance for one reason above all others, that of every person in the world, there was one he could always, perfectly, believe, the woman who had walked into his study a stranger and refused, from the first word to the last, to tell him anything but the truth.